Hi, my name is Jordan Dea-Mattson, and I work at Yahoo. My title is Chef de Cuisine Infrastructure. Actually, both Jer and I put together these titles based on what people do in the kitchens. And so that seemed to be the best fit for what I did. My background goes back almost 30 years in the industry. I worked at Apple, was involved in the Power Mac project as well as Mac OS X. Was actually there the night Steve Jobs came back to Apple. And had a very peripheral role in that, which was a lot of fun. Worked at Adobe Systems, went also and worked for a medical device company, and gives a whole new meaning to your software being clean when you know that people's lives are on the line. And then worked at a company called Wuenschel, which is a video startup doing some very interesting stuff. And another company called Numenta, founded by Jeff Hawkins, doing some good stuff in machine intelligence. And finally, I'm at Yahoo working on our chef initiative. Jer.
I'm Jer Wuenschel. It says sous chef continuous delivery. That basically means that I, with the awesome team that I work on, do all the dirty work to make Jordan look good.
And they do. They make me look very good. So, if you are in an enterprise and you're trying to push a technical change that involves something like adopting the caliber, a tool like Chef, you need to have an elevator pitch. You need to be able to tell someone in 2 floors why Chef, or whatever else you're trying to do. At Yahoo, this is our elevator pitch. This was the elevator pitch that was developed. Yours may be different. You're welcome to steal this one if it works for you, but you have to have one. And first off, why Chef? Because we want to describe infrastructure as code. Okay, well, why is that important? Why would you want to do that? Because it means that you can do automation cleanly. It means that you have traceability. It means you have repeatability. And these are things that, you know, even the most technically removed exec gets and understands that these are good things and that they would like them to happen. The next is it allows you to bring TDD and BDD to infrastructure. Yahoo has really embraced TDD and BDD throughout the engineering culture, and we now want to bring that not just to our apps, not just to our systems, but to our infrastructure. And the ability to test your infrastructure and ensure that it's in the state you want it to be in, that you're actually creating what you thought you were creating, is just a huge win. And it's great, you know, that you can, using tools in BDD, you can also do things like build a security checklist or build a release readiness checklist so that you can address and tickle the fancy of people who are in other groups that may have more heavy-handed processes than you do. You know, instead of having 117 items in a spreadsheet that you need to go through and check yes or no, why the heck aren't we doing that in tests? And we can't if we embrace not just a TDD, but also a BDD approach. And finally, we want to provide a modern workflow on which our continuous delivery efforts can sit. We want to be able to do continuous delivery all the way down the pipeline from that code commit to bringing up that box in production, configuring it, and then deploying the software to it and getting it running. So this, for us, this was our elevator pitch. We really urge you, you need one. Come up with one. Now, a little history here. So back in 1994, Yahoo was launched. Over a year later, this company called Amazon, have you heard of them? They showed up. They sold their first book. Okay? And in that fall, in September, happy birthday for me, this little company started selling Pez dispensers over the internet and built a great business around it. You might have heard of them. They're called eBay. And then, late in 99, 98, this Johnny-come-lately shows up, this company called Google. So what you realize is when you look at this timeline is, and fast forward to this year, March 2014, we're 20 years old. So we're not legal to drink yet, but we're getting close. But Yahoo was the first, we're the hipster, the original hipster web scale company. And with that, we actually are dealing with something that might surprise you. I think all of us have heard of first mover advantage and how important that is. Well, there's this thing called first mover handicap. which is when you're the first person through the door, you have nobody else's experience to build on. You have nobody else's scar tissue to leverage in terms of what you're going to do. You're going to make choices, and guess what? They were great choices at that moment in time, and even for some time after that. But the fact is you made an investment. You now have to deal with that investment, and you have to deal with that legacy. And this is one of the things you're going to deal with if you're in an enterprise that is going to be operating at big scale, because you're not going to have a greenfield to go with. You're going to be building on something that's already there. Our talk is about scale. And usually when people talk about scale, they're talking about how many users you're dealing with, or how many page visits per day, how many unique visits. Maybe they start talking about nodes. But scale is really a measure of complexity. Okay? So you need to start thinking about things other than that. Like, okay, how many data centers do you have? How many tool chains are you dealing with? How many actual individual system teams, people that are building software applications, are you dealing with? How many processes do they have? What is the heterogeneity of the processes? And then there's the whole rate of change. And so you end up with this very, very, huge set of interrelationships that is scale to us. It's the complexity that you deal with. Yes, it's the number of nodes. Yes, it's the number of users. But it's also these other things that if you're in an enterprise, things that will have grown organically, you did not have a greenfield, you'll have a lot of them. And it will be complexity. Now, what we've done is we step back at a moment in time in our journey, starting about, 4 to 6 weeks ago. And we said, what have we learned so far? What do we know? What do we believe to be true at this point? And we identified some patterns. And the patterns are, we tell you a pattern, we talk about a problem, and we talk about a solution. So kind of classic Gang of Four approach there. But we want to stress, this is take one. This is at this moment in time. We're here. If you come and talk to us a year from now, things may have changed. We will have new things we've learned because we want to be continually learning. But these are the patterns that we've identified, and we're going to walk you through each of them. And Jared's going to lead off with the first one.
All right, so the first pattern that we recognized is that it's not just culture, not just tools. The culture that you have creates a set of tools, and the tools that everybody uses helps to shape and reinforce the culture. So we want to step through a little bit of the history of the tool culture at Yahoo. So initially, like a lot of companies, you start with a tarball, put it on a base OS. All you need is a sysadmin there to tweak the OS, and then you can start serving traffic. But then we needed to tweak that base OS everywhere. So we created our first system config automation. That allowed us to tweak the underlying system while continuing to move forward. We had this application and system config. So there was a problem with that, because if you take a tarball and you just splat it on top of this expertly tweaked base OS, you run into conflicts. So we split the application stack from the base OS. We actually made a very clever separation that fully separates the entire stack that the application is served on from the underlying base OS. This increased our velocity. We were able to solve the problems that were right in front of us, and we were able to move forward. What we ended up with, though, is two different types of automation. We had the OS config automation, the sort of operations concerns, and then we had the application stack automation. And for each of these things, we began to iterate. Conway's Law took effect. So Conway's Law says, to paraphrase, that the shape of your architecture will take on the shape of your organization. And that's exactly what happened. We iterated along our config automation. We iterated along our application stack automation. And we basically had two vectors of change that we went into. So let me dive a little bit into how the application stack automation worked. So a developer works on code, and that code ends up showing up in packages. You have a set of packages that go on a system, and that's a stack. But a single stack of packages isn't enough to serve up your application, so we created an abstraction around the idea of a stack to allow us to push the individual pieces out. We have UIs, APIs, databases that we're deploying everywhere. This set of hosts, this set of packages can serve up your infrastructure, but you need to be able to replicate that in various places. So we created another abstraction around it.
So we have abstractions within abstractions within abstractions? Yeah,
and so this was version 1, version 2, version 3 of us solving the problem that was right in front of us. We ended up with a very sophisticated system that is capable of deploying very complex things. But at the same time, for an individual developer to get in and work on their piece of the stack, they require all this tribal knowledge. They have to look at the cluster automation and figure out how to get that deployed to some development environment. They have to know what the individual stacks look like, and then they have to know the interaction of the packages within the stack. This especially creates additional overhead when a new project comes along and they have to start at the package level and say, okay, which packages are for our stack? There may be two groups that are doing an app on top of Apache, but the individual packages that form that stack are going to be different between the two. So what are we doing to start to address this? The first thing that we did was to pull our heads out of the sand. It's very easy in a big company to keep solving that problem that's in front of you and say like, well, we have this problem right now. You know, other people don't have this problem because we have this tool which gives us this other problem. So we explicitly stopped and looked around at the industry. We said what is the state of the art for deployment, for config management? Stop and look around. Additionally, we have all these acquisitions, new hires coming in that are very passionate about what they do. And when they hit friction with this system that has organically grown over time, they don't understand why they have to do what they have to do. So we went around and we talked to people. We said, what do you do in the industry? What did you do before you came here? And you know, they pointed out the same things that we were seeing. We were seeing declarative interfaces everywhere. We were seeing clean interfaces to complex things, Heroku, Chef, Travis, that sort of thing. So we decided to stop. We said, all right, we need to allow for a complete change in paradigm. So we set out on a project where we said, imagine there's no Yahoo stuff at all, and we're starting out fresh. We need to serve up the types of things that Yahoo serves up, but let's pretend that there's no Yahoo stack at all. So we did a POC where we started in that way. We proved to ourselves that there was something else out there that was possible. We used Chef. We brought the Chef folks in, and we had a really nice experience with that. That also gave us the ability to go prove to other people that it can be different. So after the initial POC, we started going out to different groups within Yahoo and saying, there's a new way that we can deploy things. We showed them what we had, and we said, all right, let's find this path to start growing in a new direction. So that's the journey that we're on right now, is continuing to prove that it can be different across the board.
Now, one of the most interesting things that people saw was we were able to help them bring up Jenkins clusters incredibly fast. And this was just wowed people. I remember one case just a few months ago where we went in and met with the release engineering team, and they wanted to do some significant things to their Jenkins cluster, and like, well, could Chef help us out? And Jer and Venkat, who's on our team, showed them in like 3 hours. Well, here, we'll just bring up a whole new cluster. And they were just totally blown away because that was weeks and weeks of effort that was captured in that, and just was incredible. Cool. So the next pattern that we identified is one that we feel is really critical, and that is that the customer isn't always right. Do you know how when you are doing a root cause analysis, you do a 5 whys? Because the first why is not what caused the problem, and the second and the third. If you go out and talk to people and say, hey, what would you like? Let's pretend it's 1983, and we're product managers for IBM. And we go out to people and we say, hey, what do you want in a computer? These new microcomputers, they're really cool, aren't they? And they would talk to us and they would say, well, you know, instead of that CPM thing, I'd probably like this MS-DOS thing. I heard it's pretty cool. And oh gosh, if you could put one of those hard drives, those are really cool. I'd like that. And oh God, you know what would be killer? If it was portable, if I could lug it around. And what you'll do is you'll end up with what's on the left, which was IBM's first portable computer introduced within a few months of the Macintosh in 1984. You will not end up with the Macintosh. That's not what you're going to get. Because you're going to only be touching their surface needs, their surface desires. You need to dig deeper, and you need to keep asking. If you do that, then what you're going to end up is with something like the iPad. When you go and you ask the 5 whats and dig down into what do people really need, what are their desires, and pull that back. The trouble is, the environment we're in, it's the water we swim in, it's the air we breathe. Like we talked about in the earlier pattern, you can't get out of it. You can't see that there's something else. And so one of the things you have to do is you have to really force yourself to be disciplined in this process. Now, this iPad, the first one introduced, or the first iPhone, or the Mac, the original Mac 128K, to be charitable, they were extremely limited. The original iPhone, there were no applications. It was all web apps. There was no multitasking. There were all a host of limitations. But what it did is something was identified that cut right down to that root need, that root desire. So look at this like you would root cause analysis. And instead of asking whys, ask whats. Okay?
So another pattern that we identified was a recognition that we have to support the past while we're building for the future. You get this shiny new idea, and the world doesn't stop. You have the existing infrastructure to deal with. One thing we want to completely avoid is, as XKCD puts it best, you know, there are 14 things there right now. What we don't want to do is make a 15th thing and just increase the complexity of the entire system. So, and an approach to that we've come up with, we call a minimum viable migration path. The idea is that we do the least that we need to do in order to start moving down this new path, and then you can start to build on top of what's there. So some specific approaches are start with an empty run list. It seems really basic, but anybody who's used Chef for any length of time knows that just bootstrapping those nodes suddenly gives you some insight into your system that you never had before.
I was talking to someone who they deployed Chef through a deployment mechanism they had. So they got the client on, empty run list, doing it. They found servers they didn't know they had. Literally. It was like, what are these? You know, these servers had not been accounted for years. You know, and there's some apocryphal knowledge about what they gained about those servers and what was running on them that shouldn't have been running on them. But there's power there. That's incredible power. Finding stuff you didn't know you had.
So this gives you a foothold, a place to start moving into a new world. And if you do it via CD, then you kind of get the tricky stuff done up front, and you can just slowly iterate and build out your system. So the next logical step was for log forwarders and metrics and that sort of thing, monitoring, the types of things that are going to be the same across all of your infrastructure. we wouldn't have a need with monitoring cookbooks to interfere with the existing Yahoo infrastructure. So we started down that path, and we're right now, for instance, working on Splunk forwarder cookbooks, Splunk server cookbooks, and then a suite of monitoring cookbooks. So the idea there is that you actually start to automate config, you start to automate the deployment of changes via Chef, but it's not in a way that would interfere with applications.
Right, and in our particular case, it's reduced, given our historic models, it's reduced the complexity that people are having to deal with significantly. We have with this, we have sliced a Gordian knot for people, and does it sound sexy? Does it seem sexy? No, but do people appreciate it? Yeah. Did you deliver customer value? God, yes.
Yeah, it turns out configuring monitoring totally sucks. And with cookbooks, it becomes significantly easier. It's similar to Jenkins that we talked about before. And in fact, the next thing is doing something like a WAR file on top of the existing Yahoo stack. So one of the things that we spent quite a bit of time on was really perfecting deploying a Jenkins cluster. We were able to deploy Jenkins on top of existing Yahoo infrastructure. And as part of it, we created a set of technology bridges to bridge the interface of cookbooks with our underlying idea of stacks and clusters. We were very careful to try not to couple the two. So the idea is that we actually create this new declarative interface on top of the existing Yahoo stack. And we're able to deploy the Yahoo Java stack using cookbooks, using these small shims, and then we can put WAR files on top and configure the system in the way that you would normally with Chef recipes.
So I'm going to make a stronger statement here. Don't support the past. Strangle it. Figure out how you're going to put it out of its misery and you out of its misery as quickly as possible. Think of Martin Fowler's system strangler pattern, where you're coming in the edges and as quickly as you can, you are strangling the older existing system and replacing it with something new. Figure out what are those abstractions that will let you do that and will let you take chunks out of the past very quickly, that will bridge you forward. And you'll be surprised. They won't seem super sexy. They won't seem big and bright. But they will deliver incredible value. And this is, at the end of the day, this is all about customer value. You know, each period of time you go by and people don't see movement forward, don't see change, they're going to be questioning the investment you're making. So as the earliest you can deliver customer value that's palpable, do it. That's just critical. That's me. So next pattern we identified is that people, and I imagine it's the people in this room, who are taking on the role of driving the technical change of adopting Chef and moving to infrastructure as code at a company, need to view themselves as agents of change. Now, an agent of change is someone who goes in and changes an existing culture. They don't do all the work, okay? But they drive and catalyze that change. Why do you need to do this? Because no matter how big your team is, no matter how passionate, and I will stack the passion of our team up against anybody in the industry, we are passionate about what we're doing, we love what we do, we love working together. I'll stack them up against anybody. We don't have enough passion to carry Yahoo across the finish line. We can't do it. So what's the solution to this problem? You know, we can't write all the cookbooks that need to be written. We can't introduce the patterns that need to be introduced. We can't get the workflows set up. We just can't. Well, what you need to do is you need to build a community. Chef has done this beautifully. They have built a community, the Chef community, and this morning, in one of the keynotes, the line, I think it was Adam, Chef would exist without Chef Inc. because there is a community. But Chef Inc. would not exist without the chef community. Has anybody here done like Habitat Humanity, build out a house, you know, in a weekend? So you show up bright and early on Saturday morning, you got your hammers and your tools, sunscreen, canteen, sunglasses, you're ready to roll. And you walk up to a site and it's ready to go. And so you go in and over the next 48 hours, you work your arse off and you get a house built, and you know, just before sundown on Sunday, you hand the keys to someone and they have a house. But that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been agents of change out there who went and got permits and got utilities pulled. And maybe were there 3 weeks before pouring a foundation for you and ordering materials and getting plans and reaching out and organizing people to show up. Or think of a hackathon. A hackathon. It seems like spontaneous, 24 hours, we write a whole bunch of code, great things happen. If you've ever been involved on the planning side of a hackathon, you know there's a tremendous amount. You've got to get a space. You've got to make sure that you have subject matter experts. You have to get the right people together. You've got to have food, you can have drink, you've got to provide all that stuff. This is what agents of change do, is they do that work to build a community. They're the people who hold the light up, lift up the torch and say, this is the way to go. They curate the cookbooks. So they drive that process. And then over time, they get themselves out of the curation business. But this is critical. You need to do this. You need to view it this way. If you sit in your cube farm and expect people to come to you, the result will be very, very bad. You need to go out and you need to meet them. You need to go to where they're at. This is just critical, you know. And we learned this. We got burned on this one, you know, where we said, well, they're not coming to us. And it's like, you know what? We need to go to them. The minute you move into the zone of 1 plus n people working actively against your chef server, i.e. 2 and above, you will find that writing to your chef server directly using knife will cause problems. The reality is a knife can be dangerous, and it can cause you problems. And you have to use the tool appropriately to achieve this. I remember one late night deploy that I was involved in at my previous company, and I had checked in modifications to an environment, putting new cookbooks in place. I had checked in modifications to a data bag, putting new changes we had, and I was pushing those changes. Another engineer who was working on the deployment with me had misunderstood the instructions, and so he was pushing also. Unfortunately, he hadn't pulled from the Git repo. And so for about 2 hours, there was this back and forth of, that's wrong, that's not what it should be. Why is that happening? As I push changes and he pushed changes. You do not want to resolve these kind of issues live in a production environment or even a test environment. You don't want to resolve this at runtime because we've got better tools for resolving that, and that's called your source code repository. Everything that describes your infrastructure should be committed in code. You should not be, knife should be treated, if it isn't, as read-only, okay? It's informational. You don't write. You don't change the state. I mean, to me, I view using knife against a running chef server like going and pushing memory values into memory in runtime. Now, did we used to do that? Oh, yeah, we did. We used to do that. Mac 68K hacking, we would push values in and we would change things. Was it a good practice? Hell no. So what you want is you want a pipeline that is vetting this stuff before it goes out. You submit your code. You submit your environment files. You submit all of this, you know, kind of organizational information to Git. You resolve any issues there. You push it through a linting process. You execute it through testing. You do the environment pinning and locking that you need to do. And finally, you publish it out to the appropriate environment. A continuous delivery pipeline with unsoiled by human hands except for code commits. And you know, we haven't figured out how to deal with that one yet. But That means that's when the cyborg overlords come, we will still have a role in society. So Jer, over to you.
Okay, so the last pattern, the actual scaling of the system is at the end of the presentation for a reason. And that's because like all of the other problems that we talked about are much harder, honestly. As an engineer, scaling something is a solvable problem. Everything else is culture and people and changing the world, and it's going to feed directly into how you're going to scale your system, and it's going to be the real mark of success.
Or do you have to scale because?
Yeah. So the problem, like the internet is a series of tubes, and sometimes they clog. We want to make sure that we're not flooding our network, that we're able to scale with demand as it increases. Sort of the obvious things that as we bring virtual nodes online, we need to be able to add many hundreds of thousands of them. So we've iterated on this quite a bit with Chef Inc. This is a high-level idea around how we're currently scaling out. As you can see, humans will interact with Chef via GitHub. For the POCs, this isn't 100% correct. It's not the case, and we're having to transition the POCs to interface entirely via source control.
So, point, if you're doing a POC and you can clear that out of the way easily, do it. It'll save you some time.
Yep. So there's a source control system. There's a continuous delivery system, and whenever cookbooks are changed, they're tested, and they are pushed through the sync layer. We originally were looking at something closer to like Facebook's approach with grocery delivery service. We had purely geographic sharding around failure domains. We talked to customers about it, and they were really not looking forward to the limitations that would put on the system, because we want to provide the awesomeness that Chef allows with search, with data bags, Chef Vault we love. So we were making a lot of compromises, and this is where we have ended up with the scale out. Essentially, these product groups that are listed here are groups of orgs. So the idea is that an org will never exist across multiple colos, and as the size of a given org grows, we can shift it to its own cluster. We have primary and secondary, so that we have BCP, n number of colos.
And down at the cluster level, this is the Chef HA architecture for fault tolerance there, and being able to deal with the failure of a backend and recover from it. So we think we have a relatively good defense in depth here. Cool. So we've talked about a few patterns here, and I'm just going to recap them real quickly. First off, there's this false dichotomy between culture and tools. The reality is your tooling that you have had has shaped your culture, and your culture has shaped your tooling. You need to recognize that fact, and you need to step back out of that and look at what's around you and see what makes sense for you to bring in and embrace. If you were to take what we presented here as a blueprint and implement it at your company, that would be a mistake. It really would, because you're unique, you're different. You need to understand what those pieces are, because only you have lived in that culture, only you have lived with that tooling, and you have to figure out the way you're going to navigate through that. Next, your customers are not always right. People are going to ask you for stuff that at first blush sounds incredibly like the right thing. It's only when you dig through it, when you go through the 5 whats and figure out that, oh no, that's really not what they're asking for. you know, if we gave them that surface thing, they really would not be happy long term. This is how you're going to delight people. And, you know, hey, we're in the delight economy. That's all we're part of. So we should be doing that as the people who are bringing Chef and bringing this model of continuous delivery, continuous deployment to people. We should be bringing delight into their lives. And so we really need to think hard and work hard to make that happen. So, you know, dare I say it, having good product owners who understand the space, understand the customers, is critical. Next, you've got to really acknowledge that you're going to strangle the past. When I was at Apple, during the Mac OS X project, there was a senior engineer who got up and said, hey, every year we need to plan on basically killing 10% of the apps. We're going to break them. And his thesis was that the only way we could move forward was if we made the kind of changes that broke people. So you need to do that. But the thing that Apple did is they provided bridges forward. You know, the original emulators, things like that, that allowed Carbon, that let people move forward. But at the same time, they didn't compromise the future to support that past. So go and read, you know, Martin Fowler's, you know, the System Strangler pattern. Think about it. Think about what it means in your environment. You're going to need to be agents of change. You need to go in and be injecting the kind of the chef yeast into your company and nurturing it. You're not going to be able to do all the work. You've got to build allies. You've got to have people that are supporting you. You have to have people who you would love to hire in your team. And they say to you, you know what, I want to stay here in this team because I can do more for this work than I could if I joined you. Scale requires continuous delivery. We have got to, the patterns you developed while you were experimenting with Chef on your own, the workflows that you developed, you need to seriously change them the minute you move into POC and move to a model that's going to be continuous delivery and everything. And finally, scale logically. Identify how you can slice and dice your company. You really have about a 40,000 node limit that you're going to be dealing with each Chef enterprise server. If you're going to be bigger than that, and we are, then you're going to have to deal with that and scale logically. Now, this is my chance to kind of do my Steve Jobs. Oh, but one more thing. And I want to talk about some of the things that we've been looking at. And I'm doing it as if these were movies, so these are movie titles. So it's a preview of coming attractions. The first is Oh Hi, Oh Hi. Oh Hi is incredibly underrated and not given the esteem that it deserves. Realize that with Oh Hi, you have the ability to gather intelligence on every piece of hardware in your fleet. So what does that mean? Well, for example, you know, security scans could be built into Oh Hi and reported out. Okay, replacing infrastructure that might have been built for that and might be costly, in fact. You know, gathering, you know, ensuring that certain states are happening and certain things are happening, providing kind of a back check on your monitoring. Next, cookbooks aren't forever. We tend to think of cookbooks as these pieces of code that we want to reuse, and so we design them like that. And when we do that, we end up missing whole categories of problems that we could aim them at. For example, we recently, like pretty much everybody here, have had to deal with Heartbleed. And this required some significant work on our part. One of the things this implied was we needed to rekey every Chef client that we had. And we were sitting down, we were talking about that, and we were figuring out how it was looking really painful. Until we said, hold it. Can't we do this with a cookbook? Started talking with our friends at Chef, and we have, in our repository now, we have a Heartbleed cookbook. Now, someday, may we take that and refactor it and make it into a generalized, you know, key rotation cookbook? Maybe. But we solved the problem we needed to solve with this one-shot cookbook. Sugar is very, very sweet. It's something you should embrace. The Chef sugar stuff is great. But step back and say, what kind of sugar does my company need that's specific to my company? What is the sugar that various groups or orgs need? So, for example, having sugar that says, what data center am I in? What security zone am I in? These are all things that, you know, will be very useful to our people and that as a central team we'll be building. Next is the uptake ramp, the learning curve to use Chef declaratively is so much lower than that if you're doing imperative chef. And what do I mean by that? If you're kind of using chef in the declarative fashion, kind of providers, resources, versus actually writing those things or embedding a whole bunch of Ruby code in your cookbooks, it's much easier to do the declarative. So you need people that are saying, hey, how do we make this declarative? How do we find these things that are going to have big value? And a lot of times those will end up being some of your minimally viable migration paths. If you can nail that and you can say, we have a version of a load balancer. And so we now have been working on a declarative cookbook to configure that load balancer. Big win for people. We really believe that docking is cool. We really like Docker. We believe that Docker is going to have incredible implications both in our deployment architecture, but aside from that, in terms of our ability to test. It's not a perfect match. You're going to hit into things that don't make sense and everything. But what it does enable is pushing certain classes of test further upstream so that you can be testing earlier. And as long as you're aware of the gotchas, and understand to what degree those tests have a fidelity to the real world and not, it'll be very powerful and great stuff. And finally, we've been tracking Chef Metal for a while. We love it, and we loved what we heard about Chef Metal yesterday morning. Provisioning, orchestration. This is cool. This is what we need. Using that stuff would have saved me so much pain at a previous company. We ended up writing a whole bunch of custom plugins to do a lot of what Chef Metal does, and that's great. It's great that they're coming in there. So if you would be interested in working on the kind of scale we are at Yahoo, and you'd like to work in one of two areas. One is on the platform, and how do we build out this platform and the providers and become very declarative, or the service. Because we're going to be running essentially a super hosted chef within Yahoo. If either of those appeal to you, we're hiring, guys. So you just need to send your email to cookingupawesome@yahooinc.com and grab it. And finally, if you want to reach me, Twitter at Dea-Mattson. So that's J-D-E-A-M-A-T-T-S-O-N. Oh, you're not Twitterfied?
I don't tweet. Sorry.
You don't tweet? Okay. So thank you. I don't believe we have any time for questions, but we'll be outside and you can grab us, okay? Thank you very much for coming.